Part 2 of this series will examine the combatants. We will begin in this episode by examining the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. As 1863 dawned, Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, must have been cautiously optimistic concerning their chances for independence. On the diplomatic side, his ambassadors reported continual interest on the part of the European powers to force a negotiated settlement. Along the Mississippi, General Grant's two-pronged attack on the key river city of Vicksburg had been foiled. General Sherman's amphibious attack along the Mississippi River had suffered a bloody repulse at the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou. The eastern prong of the attack under General Grant was forced to turn back after Confederate cavalry under General Van Dorn captured the main Union supply depot at Holly Springs. In Middle Tennessee, General Bragg reported a Confederate victory at the Battle of Stones River. Bragg was later forced to retreat in the face of a Union counteroffensive, however. Still, Davis had to know that the key to victory lay in the east, where the political and economic center of the Union was located. And he had just the man to bring him this victory. In less than a year of being in command of the Army of Northern Virginia, Robert E. Lee had brought Davis a series of stunning victories, marred only by one draw. Davis had every reason to believe that 1863 would be the year that Lee would bring him the decisive victory the Confederacy so desperately needed. The Army of Northern Virginia was the instrument which Lee would use to bring Davis this victory. It had a compact organization composed of 2 infantry corps, a cavalry division, and an artillery reserve. Lee's First Corps was commanded by General James Longstreet. Graduating from West Point near the bottom of his class in 1842, Longstreet was commissioned into the infantry. He served in the Mexican War, where he earned 2 brevet promotions, and was wounded at the Battle of Chapultepec. He remained in the Army after the war and served on frontier duty until he resigned in 1861. As a boy, Longstreet was nicknamed Peter by his father due to his rock-like character, and the name stuck with him. A veteran of most of the battles in the East, Longstreet earned the reputation as a solid and trusted performer. Lee referred to Longstreet as "my old warhorse." Still, this was the James Longstreet who watched his men being slaughtered by massed artillery at Malvern Hill, and observed his corps as it mowed down wave after wave of Union infantry attacking his position at Marye's Heights in Fredericksburg. This must have convinced him of the foolhardiness of attacking a prepared defensive position backed by artillery, a belief which would resurface later in the year. General Thomas Jackson commanded Lee's Second Corps. Jackson was an 1846 West Point graduate commissioned into the artillery. He served in the Mexican War, earning 2 brevet promotions. Jackson resigned from the Army in 1852 to become an instructor at the Virginia Military Institute. Known universally as Stonewall for his performance at the First Battle of Bull Run, Jackson cemented his reputation as an aggressive and shrewd commander in the Valley Campaign, the Battle of Cedar Mountain, and the Second Battle of Bull Run. After Lee, Jackson was perhaps the South's most gifted tactical commander. General James Ewell Brown Stuart, known as Jeb, commanded Lee's cavalry. Graduating from West Point in 1852, Stuart was too young to have served in the Mexican War. He served in the cavalry on the frontier, perfecting his trade in operations against the Native American tribes on the Great Plains. Stuart espoused the cavalier ethos of a bygone era and looked for opportunities to display the elan and fearlessness of his cavalry. He had successfully conducted raids around the Union Army twice and was eager to do so again. As Chief of Artillery, General William Pendleton was in command of the General Artillery Reserve and was the advisor to Lee on artillery organization and utilization. Pendleton was an odd choice for Chief of Artillery. He graduated from West Point in 1830, 1 year behind Lee, and was commissioned into the artillery. Pendleton resigned his commission in 1833 after just 3 years, and in 1838 he was ordained an Episcopal priest. When the war began, he had been a priest for over 22 years and away from the artillery branch for over 27 years. Artillery technology and tactics had evolved significantly during that time, and it is unclear exactly how much of these changes Pendleton managed to absorb. Confederate infantry benefited from better organization than the Federal infantry and was comprised of seasoned soldiers and competent officers. Universal conscription laws kept units at relatively full strength, although the draft was to the disadvantage of civilian contributions to the war effort, which required manpower. In contrast, the Union relied primarily on volunteers to man their regiments. Instead of keeping veteran units up to strength, new units were recruited with untrained soldiers and untested officers. Many veteran units in the Army of the Potomac started the year severely under strength. In addition to this, the regiments were enlisted for a limited time, some for 3 years and some for only 9 months. The Confederate cavalry began the war with a distinct advantage over their Federal counterparts in terms of quality of horses and the level of horsemanship among its troopers. By the spring of 1863, however, the advantage in horse quality had deteriorated due to the demands of continual campaigning and the loss of key horse breeding areas in Kentucky and Tennessee. The Federal cavalry held the advantage, however, in weaponry. While the Union troopers were equipped with breech-loading carbines and pistols, the Confederate cavalry was generally only armed with pistols. Some had infantry rifles or carbines, but they were not uniform as it was on the Federal side. The high rate of fire of these breech-loading rifles gave the dismounted Union trooper an enhanced combat power able to stand up to Confederate infantry, as would be demonstrated later in the summer. Of the 3 combat arms, the Confederate artillery was the one at a noticeable disadvantage compared to the Union artillery. Each battery was organized and equipped by its own particular state, and the type of artillery piece assigned to each battery depended on what was available to that particular state. Often, batteries would have 2 or 3 different types of artillery pieces, making for a logistical nightmare. In addition, Confederate munitions were substandard. One Confederate artillery commander reported that only 1 out of every 13 shells exploded in one battle due to defective fuses. Northern artillerymen were often more experienced in handling and repairing mechanical devices, so they had an advantage in this respect. In addition to this, the Army of Northern Virginia had fewer total artillery pieces compared to the Army of the Potomac, and with a higher ratio of smoothbore to rifled pieces. This is significant as rifled cannon have a much longer effective range compared to smoothbore pieces as shown here. If it came to an artillery duel, the side with more smoothbore cannons would be at a distinct disadvantage. This deficiency would become critical later in the summer. As he faced the campaign season of 1863, Lee's only real problem was that of supply. 2 years of hard fighting had placed an enormous strain on material and animals. An effective Union blockade and a limited Confederate manufacturing base made replacing damaged or worn-out equipment difficult. Many men were without shoes or winter coats. Horses and mules were not in good condition, and replacements were hard to find. Still, Lee had every reason to be confident. His men had performed brilliantly, achieving everything he asked of them. Lee's men, in return, had a deep trust in Lee, and together Lee and his men began to display what was later described as the victory disease, an unshakable belief in their own invincibility and an unhealthy lack of respect for the fighting abilities of their Yankee opponents. In the next episode of The Combatants, we will examine the Union Army of the Potomac. For more information on the book, including a sample chapter available for download, visit www.robertjsweetman.com.